Hello, beautiful visionaries. This is Lorna Liana, and I'm so happy to bring to you today Sitaramaya Sita. Sita has traveled and worked in the Amazon for the past 17 years. She is a spiritual herbalist, Pusangera, also known as Perfumera, and a plant wisdom practitioner formerly trained in the Shipibo Ayahuasca tradition. Founder of PlantTeachers, dedicated to cultivating entheogenic awareness, and producer of the Visionary Convergence conference, she lectures, teaches, and works with individuals and groups in ceremonies and stewarding plant dietas. She currently trains, teaches, and practices to heal personal, institutional, and cultural trauma. Thank you so much for your time today. Welcome, Sita.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I would love to hear about your journey on how you began to train in this way, and especially discover more about the art of being a Pusangera.
Okay, well, thanks. And thanks for your curiosity about this. I particularly appreciate that. The work with the Pusangas and with the aromatics is not something that is very widely known, nor is something that I typically talk about. I'm more often talking about, the plants that we're more familiar with in dietas and, ayahuasca shamanism. So what can I share?
Well, okay, so how did you get started? This is a very unusual path for most Westerners, and especially to, go from maybe your first experience in the Amazon to actually, embarking on a path of serious apprenticeship.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, my path with plant medicine started 13 years before I even encountered plant medicine. And I say that because I had a profound spiritual awakening at a pretty young age. And, as many people know about me, I had, I was a drug addict and an alcoholic starting at the age of 12. And got sober at 25 and realized from 25 to 38 that was actually a dieta. And I got the very clear message that whole time of very strict abstinence from everything, like including even an aspirin, was a really powerful time in preparation for an opening to plant medicines. And I got that message pretty much the first time I came to it. And then I'll shorten this because we don't have a lot of time, but my first times in the Amazon was in Brazil. And along the way, I met Jeremy Narby, who became a dear friend. He's a cultural anthropologist. And he introduced me to some shamans in Peru. I felt this very strong call. And by the time I got to Peru and did my first formal dieta with a master plant, I had already been with the medicine at that juncture for about 4 years. And I knew the minute that I was actually asked if I wanted to apprentice, and I had no idea what it meant. And again, it was, I think, the mystery and spirit really working through me. By that point, I had already completed a yoga teacher training, which I did to amplify my own practice. So when I was asked, well, do you want to apprentice? I thought of it the same way. Oh, I'll learn to go deeper. I'll learn more in order to amplify my work, personal work. And unbeknownst to me, when I said yes, I then embarked on a dieta that lasted a year, which was not what I thought it was going to be. But I did it. And subsequent to that, continued to work with master plants, which are the teacher plants, doing dietas. And then it was probably 6.5 years after I first came to ceremonial work that I even did a ceremony for myself. So it was a very long training process. And along the way, had this keen interest that kept coming with the aromatics, with the Pusanga, and what is this mysterious plant potion that smells so good, and sometimes not so good, that can alter vibrations and open us and protect us. So I learned that and received that download from my maestro's mother, who was a very old Shipibo woman, who felt inclined to share some information and knowledge about that.
Can you tell us more about that art? I remember hearing of it when I was in Peru, and it always intrigued me, but I never really discovered much more about it.
So, in the folk practices in the Peruvian, in the Amazonian basin of Peru, people will go to a perfumera or a pusanguera or pusangero when they want a change of luck, right? If they have a run of bad luck, or they want to attract love in their life, or they want protection from something. And, I'm talking about my knowledge of it. And like anything in the Amazonian basin, it can vary widely and wildly, from one tribe to another, from one practice to another. And I think the best way that I can describe it is by, stepping for a minute into North American herbalism. So herbalists tend to have their go-to herbs or plants that they work with. And the plants are amazing because there can be a multitude of plants that would be used to treat an illness. But depending on the herbalist's relationship with the plants that she uses, she might use one plant for arthritis where somebody else uses something else. She might use one plant for calming and relaxation, whereas somebody else might use something else. And so much is dependent on that practitioner's relationship with the plants. So the same is true with the work with the aromatics. So, somebody might say, well, I'm opening a new shop. And I'll use a simple example. So I'm opening a new shop. And so they might say, okay, like many people, thanks to modern technology and global communications, have heard of this tree called Ayauma, right? The cannonball tree. So it has these cannonball fruits. And so you would take it and put it in a bucket of water, and you would wash out the shop to wash out any kind of prior bad luck and to clean it and bring prosperity for your new business, right? So that would be one way that tree is used. It's also a really powerful tree that's used in dieta for people that are learning Ayahuasca Shamanism in the Shipibo tradition. So there are multiple different uses, but so much depends on the relationship. So one might go to see a perfumero because you feel like their husband is straying and the family is falling apart. And so it's not that it's a spell in the sense that it makes people do things that they don't want to do, but it creates conditions, vibratory conditions, for the best result to come forward. And different plants carry different vibrations and different aromatics, just like, for example, ajo sacha, which has a garlic smell. So the tribes would rub that on their body to mask the smell of being human when they went hunting. So I'm using these simple examples to demonstrate how the plants can be used. But then when it comes to preparing a potion or a pusanga, it's a little bit different because you're taking core ingredients, the plants that make it a pusanga in the first place, and then you're adding into it the other plants that are specific to that person's reason for coming to see you. So in my practice, it's a little bit different because I am practicing here in North America with the Pusanga. So when people come, they're holding a specific intention, and there is more of an interaction. So there are the basic Pusanga ingredients, and then I also work with other plants and other aromatics from around the world. I have sourced all kinds of resins and extracts and plant materials and aromatics from around the world. I have probably about 1,500 different individual ingredients. And depending on what their intention is, determines what plants I might pick. And then I do a pre-selection and then work with the client for them to, it's like a simple yes or no process. And then that determines what goes into the Pusanga and what doesn't. So and it results in a liquid that has a certain imprint based on the plants that are in it and based on the aromatic. And I work with what I refer to as earth notes, heart notes, and spirit notes.
That is so fascinating. So I have many questions for you. Okay, so you basically you have clients that come to you for potion making, essentially.
Yes.
I love that. You're a modern era potion maker. That's so wonderful. So for, in the tradition, does a pusangera or pusangero need to actually diet with the plants to be effective in their craft?
Well, traditionally and I can speak of my lineage, I can't talk about other lineages. In order to make an effective pusanga, the pusangera needs to be clean and clear. So I need to be clean and clear. Like, I can't come and make a pusanga after I've eaten a steak and, had a beer. I don't do that anyway, but just to say, our diet needs to be clean. We, this, in the Shipibo lineage, there's some basic concepts. And, one of them is to be clean, to be fortified, and to be balanced. And until the practitioner is clean and clear and balanced and fortified, you're not going to be able to do a good job for, the client, the patient, the participant, the pasajero. Okay. So in order to come to this in a good way, and depending on what is being prepared and what the reason for the pusanga is, a practitioner or the pusangera might diet for 3 days or 5 days, or in the initial preparation of, drying certain roots, you would want to maybe diet for a day or 2 or 3 before you even touch those plants, so that you're not bringing any shaitana or any negative energies or any stickiness into the component parts of the preparation.
Wow. Okay. All right. And so are the principal ingredients in a pusanga plants from the Amazon?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what makes them a pusanga. And they're not something that, you get to know them and receive them through an apprenticeship. It's not something I would say, oh, and here's the ingredients, you can go make a pusanga.
Aha. Okay. Okay. So you receive permission to work with those plants, and then thus you can work with them, or?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a way of putting it. Mm-hmm. It's more so when I have a pusanga, so the first pusanga that I received was very interesting. It was my pusanga, and it's mine. Nobody can even touch the bottle. Nobody can use it. It's not made for anybody else. It's mine. And then afterwards, I was provided a base that I could use to work with other people. And so this is a continuous process. So originally 10 years ago, that original preparation continues to evolve over time and be cured with various component parts. But that's always part of the pusanga that I would make for another person. So if I made you a pusanga, that's your pusanga. It's not to be given to anybody else. And the only time anybody could smell it is when it's on you. You would never even have them touch that bottle, because it's also a relationship that you have. So, and every time you use it, the intention that went into it is being amplified. And even if it's below the level of your consciousness, every time, you put that on you, you're amplifying that intention and releasing or cleaning what you wanted to clean and release, and calling in what you wanted to call in.
So you develop a specific recipe for each client that's particular for their needs.
Exactly. Now, I did, in the last couple of years, have a download about pusangas that people who couldn't come to me could have. So I actually even have clients that work on Skype.
Uh-huh.
And you think, well, how do you do that? Because they can't even smell it and they're not there, but it works. It's very interesting. But I have some formulas, but I have been resistant to producing them, mass producing them. Sometimes I'll have an insight or an awareness. And so I did some that I donated for a fundraiser for a Syrian family, that was happening up in Canada. And then I did some for people who travel to see me, but maybe can't be here long enough to do a Pusanga session. And so I do from time to time, make them available so that people who can't have a personalized session can still dial in, and there's a specific intention that I'm holding. So if somebody is looking to amplify their connection to joy or happiness or their spiritual self, like I have in the past made various Pusangas that are for that. So they're more like, it's more generic, but it's different. It's not the same as having a personal session. People report that they're pretty effective nonetheless, but, and I think this is more of what I'm saying, like this modern application as, tradition and culture continues to blend and emerge so that more people are able to experience it around the world.
What does a Pusanga session look like?
So essentially, people come and I have a room that is specifically dedicated and it has all of the aromatics and plants and preparations. And we have a conversation, what their intention, what they're here for. And then I do a cleansing and a clearing and with, some feathers and things that I use shamanically. And then, I begin the preparation and we go through a process. So like I have the base started, which is the Pusanga, and then we go through a selection process, which is an aromatic selection process, and it's using earth, heart, and spirit notes, top notes, light notes. And at the end of that, I actually formulate on the spot, putting the preparation together. And then I chant, I sing an Ikaro to clean the Pusanga and clean any energies, and to activate it and to amplify the medicine of the Pusanga. And then the person puts it on and we do a final soplata. And it takes about an hour.
Oh, that sounds really beautiful. Gosh, yeah. I will drop in on you next time I'm in Los Angeles. Well, to have my own Pusanga, that'd be great. Awesome. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing about this intriguing tradition. I'm curious to know what it was like to be on Dieta for a year.
Well, back then there wasn't, so I was on Dieta for a year, but I went back and forth. I wasn't in the jungle the whole time. At the time, at least with, my teacher, there wasn't like a place, like people weren't going and staying for a year in the jungle back then, people from North America. The first part of it is that I didn't know it was going to be a year. He told me it was going to be 6 months. And then when I came, at the 6 month mark, when I came back on that trip to close the diet, he's like, actually, it's a year. And at the time, he's like, and I was married. And of course, it's no sugar, no salt, no spices, no dairy, no red meat, no alcohol, no drugs, no
sex,
supplement, no sex, no masturbation, no sex in your dreams, right? And he's like, you have to go call your husband. I'm like, okay. And it was like this 3-kilometer trek in the sand, and then, a 2-hour ride in the colectivo to a locatorio so that I can make a phone call and say, actually, it's a year to my husband. We're not married anymore, but yeah. So
that's a test of faith.
Yeah. It was awesome, actually, because so much of the work was done in the shamanic realms and in the dream time, which is where the Dieta work takes place. And it really solidified this profound connection with this plant that I dieted a year. And now, fast forward all these years later, like I have people who diet with me and they're dieting that very connection. And in fact, because I wasn't in the jungle the whole time, I started cultivating the plant in my home. And that plant from that first year diet continues to grow, and I continue to make cuttings. And so when people diet with me, that one diet has now spread to so many other places and people. And the way I experience it is there's the collective diet, right? Like, so the plant I dieted was Marosa, and there's this collective diet of Marosa in the world of everybody dieting Marosa. And then also, the pathway through me, right? So I dieted with my maestro. I have these plants, and now people that diet with me are continuing to amplify that work. So for me, I couldn't know it then. And It was hard. It was lovely. It was confusing. I'm like, am I even doing anything? Am I making all this up? Like, I had no idea, right? But I just trusted. It was like I was being guided. I'm like, okay, this is what spirit wants, and this is what the medicine wants. I'll do it.
So how does it work when you support other people in their diets?
Well, basically, you're stewarding their diet. You're opening the diet for them, establishing a connection in the shamanic realms with this master plant. And then, I'm chanting for them. I'm working for them shamanically throughout the course of their diet. And then we close the diet. And when we close the diet, we basically, because you're very open when you're dieting. So then we seal it all up. And then in this tradition, we say the diet then opens after it closes. It opens into your life. Because there's so many things you can't do. Like when people diet with me, there's the food restrictions, there's no touching, there's no use of profanity, there's a specific practice every day with the plant, there's working in your dreams. So over the course of time, if they're not here with me, we're having, a specific check-in call once a week. And then, we're making sure that we're amplifying that connection, but I'm also working for them shamanically the whole time they're in their diet.
So for the time period that you did your dieta, you did not consume sugar, alcohol, or salt the entire year?
Right. So no salt, no sugar, no spices, no dairy, no red meat, no pork, no alcohol, like no supplements and vitamins and that sort of thing, no sex, no masturbation, and no sex in the dream world either.
That sounds really difficult. I mean, wow. Gosh, one of the things that comes up for me is just how my body would actually handle no meat and no meat without supplements to kind of, offset the fact that I'm not eating, animal protein. Right. Do you end up feeling really lightheaded and weak, or what happens?
Well, let me just say, and there are other restrictions and other particularities depending on the plant you're dieting. So that was just my first diet, and I've been dieting ever since, 3 months, 6 months, 8 months with this plant, 3 months with that plant. So what happens is, and there's degrees to which you can diet. And so, we're doing something that's more it's called a social diet when you're not dieting in isolation. And I've also dieted in isolation. So what happens is, I did one diet with a plant where it was no wet food, which is really hard. But the idea being, as we release, getting iron, we're existing more in the ethereal, in the spiritual dimension, which is part of it, right? So it's suffering in the body, but the body springs back. It's amazing. And we actually, at times, we want to disconnect with the physical, right? We're kind of releasing that connection to the material so that we can be in the realm of the spirits and the plant spirits. That's intentional. So, and there's this mystical part that we can't explain, but there's also a surrendering to it. So what happens at one point, and I tell people who diet with me, there comes a point of surrender. You just get you try to figure out all these things. What can I eat? And how do I make this? And how do I put it together? And then you just kind of, either you can use either the words give up or you just surrender. You're like, okay, this is how it is. And then it gets really simple and you kind of just eat the same things all the time. And you realize the food, you need it to stay alive, right? But the primary relationship is with the plant, and the plant provides the sustenance. Now, most people who diet with me are dieting for a month. I mean, people who train with me, maybe they diet for 3 months, but pretty much, by about week 2, you get it, oh, right, this is just my mind telling me all this stuff that I think I need. This is my attachment to the physical. And what I'm doing is I'm releasing that attachment. Now, it may be a little bit different because some people diet with me, because they have arthritis or, they have a gastrointestinal problem. There's a spiritual underpinning to all of that. But, every diet is different, really.
And so when you're dieting with the plant, then how do you procure the plant that you're dieting with? Are you receiving dried plant materials from people that you know who are cultivating the plants a certain way in Peru, or do you just order it online, or how does it work?
Yeah, so I'm not so much of the ordering online kind of person. So I have a number of master plants growing here. They're not psychotropic. They're, the master plants, as distinguished from, ayahuasca or, what we would consider mind altering or consciousness altering.
So what are some of the master plants in the Peruvian tradition?
Okay, Marosa is one of them. The Ajo Sacha, which I mentioned. Piñón Blanco, Ayauma. So those are just a few.
Okay.
Right? And so it depends on the plant. So also too, I also, procure seeds. So a big part of how I work with people is I have them cultivating their plants when they're dieting the plants. So some of them I'll either take a cutting or have seeds and they grow them. And so there's part of that process of having that interaction, that I think is so important because, a plant doesn't grow and say, you know what, I'm going to go grow in that darkest corner where there's no light and water, right? That's not what plants do. They're like, okay, where am I going to thrive? Oh, in the light, oh, I need moisture and water. I'm going to go in that direction of what is going to support, my highest expression and my healthiest expression. So there's something for me in working with people that, that process is so important, and if it's a cutting, seeing the roots come, right? Like, oh, and the deeper and stronger my roots are, the further I can fly without becoming untethered. So, a lot of it is with cuttings. And then in terms of like the connection with the plant, they are taking a preparation of the plant every day. Depending on the plant, sometimes once you have the connection, the physical connection, you don't need to take it every day. But there is a period of meditating with the plant, whether it's in physical form or not, every day during the dieta.
Mm-hmm. Wow, fascinating. So I'd love to hear about the connection between dieta and what it actually takes to become a person who's serving medicine.
Okay. So I'll say a couple of things. Dieta is a cornerstone of Shipibo Ayahuasca Shamanism, meaning that, I was taught that we could say my practice or we could say my diet, and it's kind of the same thing because how we come into practice and receive the medicine of the plants is through dieting. And you can kind of think of ayahuasca as a gateway to all the master plants, right? So going way back, what would happen in many situations is the shaman, right, the curandero, right? Shaman is a bit of an imported word, but the doctor, the curandero, drinks ayahuasca. And then the vision opens. And the patient is there and it's like, oh, I see what the difficulty is. Here's the plant you need to diet to heal that condition. Or here's the behavioral change that needs to happen. And this plant can help you with that. But how the healer, the curandera, knows is by their own relationship with the plants. There are times, like for me, I had a very strong connection with a plant called ayahuasca before I even dieted it. And it turned out it was a big healer plant for me in my physical body, later on. But essentially, if one is an apprentice, while you're dieting, you're also receiving the medicine of that plant so that you have this connection and you start to understand the world of that plant. Because there's master plants, teacher plants, right, that have their entire universe, their entire world. And then there are medicinal plants that are medicine, but they don't necessarily teach. And then there's the ornamentals that are for beauty and sustenance here on the planet. But it's the master plants that we're talking about in apprenticeship mode. So essentially, you also receive the songs, the Icaros. And so then the link is that when you're in ceremony, the idea is you're out of the way, whoever the you is, right? Insert name. Sita is out of the way so that what's coming through is the medicine of the plants, of the diets, in response to what the person who is like you're chanting to is calling forth. So like it's the vision, and then it's also the medicine of all the plants coming through. And sometimes it's ayahuasca. So ayahuasca can also be dieted without the chacruna, which makes it the ayahuasca brew we're so familiar with. You know, the Banisteriopsis capi is a really powerful master plant. And I actually work with it a lot. It's completely legal in almost every country on the planet. It's super powerful, detoxifying, clarifying, antidepressant, antioxidant. But all of these plants, when one diets them, you know, if you do a good diet, the better your diet is, the more you receive from the plant and the more medicine, like, you have access to. I'm not going to say you have, right? Because it's not ours. It belongs to spirit, to God, comes through when you're working with someone.
Mm-hmm. So
did that answer the question?
Yeah, in a certain way. So, you know, I think where I'm going with this is like to, you know, understand at what level is a person deemed to be ready to begin to offer medicine to other people. And I ask this because of the phenomena that you and I are both familiar with, which is kind of like the explosion of all these Western facilitators that are serving, you know, ayahuasca that really don't have any experience, but are like self-initiating themselves.
Yeah.
You know, they've never been like, you know, gone through a traditional apprenticeship program, done, you know, many, you know, months or years of different plant medicine dietas. So I want to understand like what it actually takes in the tradition to really get to that place of like, okay, you know, now you are ready to be, you know, holding ceremonial space to be offering medicine, not just ayahuasca, but other medicines too, you know, versus what we're seeing now with some of the neo-shamans.
Okay, so a couple things. There's no program. There's no book. You know, you mentioned the word program, and like, there isn't a program. It's a relationship. It's an apprenticeship. Like, if you think back, you know, a couple hundred years ago, like the person who learned how to make shoes learned from the master cobbler by the cobbler's side. Oh, this is how you do it. And when this person comes in, this is how you measure their foot. And, oh, this is the best material based on what they're going to be using the shoes for. Right. And there's not a book, a manual that you go to. You get it by working side by side with your teacher. Okay. And on the subject of tradition is ever emerging, because I think I was probably one of the earliest, you know, I shouldn't say earliest. I would say once there was some knowledge, like when I first started on this path in Peru, like Iquitos was not like the hub of like ayahuasca tourism centers. Like, that just didn't exist.
What year was this?
I was, well, I guess it would have been 2001, because when I first went to Brazil, there was no Google. There was no internet as we know it, right? So, you know, when I got to Peru, it was like literally you'd go to find the person and like either they were there or they weren't, and maybe like you traveled another day further into the jungle. Oh, there they are, because they're doing, you know, it was like that. And what I was taught, and it shifted and changed because tradition ever emerges, is that like in order to begin to sing for people, to chant for people, and work for people, you have to do a year diet. Like, that's a minimum. But you never stop dieting. In the Shipibo tradition, you do, like, if you're in a practice, it's a practice. And of course you want to diet more because you want to know more plants. You want to be able to help people more. And how you learn how to do that is by dieting the plants and understanding them. So, for me, I can talk about my experience. The first thing that I did, you know, was I was given the ayahuasca. I still remember, you know, from my teacher, and I poured it for myself. So like, that's step one. Then the next step is, you know, we're there in the Maloka, you know, in the dirt, I might add. And then the next step is then you work with the babies because they're open, right? So it's a little bit easier because they're not so entrenched. So when the babies and the kids are sick or they're having a difficulty, that's who you start your singing with first, because it's easier to work with children. And then you progress from there. That's how I was taught. Okay. I think now, like, you know, in this same lineage, which is, you know, there's a, you know, Ricardo Amaringo was also an apprentice to the same maestro. You know, he has people who come, they do a year diet. He now has a place for them where they can diet in isolation for a year, which is awesome. but also it's an aggregate. And how you know really is from your team. And then you start little by little, and how you know if you're doing good is by the people. Like they say, oh, wow, I'm feeling better. That worked. Wow, things are opening up for me. And it's through the community and the community feedback that you know how ready you are. And it's through making mistakes. You know, preferably not mistakes that are life-threatening or damaging. I'm going to switch just a moment to talk a little bit, if it's okay with you, about what you said, like the neo-shamanism. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't stand in judgment of anybody. I hold a very strong prayer that we come to the plants and we come to these practices with respect and with a clear intention for healing. And it can get really tricky because for most of us, there is this delicate balance between confidence and humility. Too much confidence puts us in the realm of ego. Too much humility, you know, weakens our reserve to do the hard work that sometimes, you know, isn't so easy to do, right? And what I'll say is this. I believe in ayahuasca. And there's a lot of people drinking ayahuasca in lots of places outside of the jungle. And relative to how much ayahuasca is being consumed, there are very few reports of difficulties from drinking ayahuasca. Now, I say that because I believe, you know, it speaks to the safety, I believe, of ayahuasca. Like, we don't hear reports. I don't know about where you are. I happen to be in North America right now, but we don't hear a lot of reports of, you know, somebody OD'd on ayahuasca and wound up at the emergency room. We just don't hear it. So I think it's a testament to the safety and the efficacy of ayahuasca and the plants. And it's more about the plants than the practitioners. And so I always say, don't mistake the practitioner for the plants. Stick with the plants, mm-hmm. right? Now, does that absolve us from holding collective responsibility for people practicing in a way that's safe and in integrity? Absolutely not. I think that we're all charged with that, those of us who are in this community. And, you know, I think that for me, because I'm in this tradition, the dieta is so important. The preparation is so important. There's 4 parts: preparation, intention, participation in the experience, and the integration afterwards, right? And the integration afterwards, the difference between having a peak experience and an experience that can actually have a practical implementation that changes our life for the better, starts with the preparation. And for practitioners, it starts with the preparation and their intimate knowledge of these plants, because they can also, the plants themselves aren't dangerous, but practitioners can be dangerous if they don't know what they're doing. And so I hold space, you know, for people to really step up and to have the desire with a good heart to help others and to do what it takes. And how we do that is by helping ourselves first. So my healing journey, like when I came to the medicine work, I had done so much healing. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, there's more. So then it was like 4 years of taking out the trash. I'm like, you're kidding me, right? But that's it. Like, it's doing our own work, our own deep, hard work, physically, psychologically, spiritually, psychically, cognitively, that makes a good practitioner, in my opinion. There's no book. We can't go to chapter 32, you know, and say, okay, here it is about, like, how do you do the soplata? Like, it's not like that. It is a body of knowledge, much like the folk knowledge we have in herbalism, in North American herbalism. It's not licensed. There's schools and they teach you, but it's through working with clients over and over and over again. And you're like, okay, I see. This is how it works. This is how we get the results. And that provides information to me. And it's a partnership along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. So I want to wrap up the conversation, with two questions. And the first one just touches upon the whole, it's up to us as a community. And so that itself can be, in a way kind of loaded, because I feel like the ayahuasca shamanism community is so fragmented in many ways. There are individual practitioners, there are, different regions of the world with different kinds of practices. While I've heard over and over again, calls to action for the community to self-police itself, I wonder, how this might be possible, especially with some of the issues that come up around sexual misconduct. And so I know that you've spoken about that particular topic. Something came across my desktop recently, actually, about a group assault that took place in the Brazilian Amazon in an indigenous village. And when I heard about that, it was so familiar. I've been to the Brazilian Amazon many times. The attitudes are totally different. There are, as much as we want to glamorize the shamans with their beautiful feather headdresses, there are major issues, in the villages. There's, a lot of misogyny, a lot of, statutory rape that's being committed by the indigenous leadership, really, dark things that take place in places, of course, that are, impoverished and have, major, social and economic issues. So how can we as a community, act together?
Okay. So first off, right here, right now, we're doing it by you and I talking about it. Number one, thank you. Number two, I think educating people. What is your risk tolerance? Right? Are you willing to go 5 days into the jungle? And if you're bit by a snake, you might die. You're 5 days in the jungle and maybe somebody assaults you, and there's nobody to call. Mm-hmm. So first off, it's this risk tolerance, which I had actually learned from my dear friend Stephen Byer, this term, no, these are the risks. This is the framework. What are you willing to tolerate? I have a really high risk tolerance, right? I think, okay, I'm 5 days in the jungle and I die. That doesn't sound like a bad way to go. I could be kidding myself, but, so I think that there's this, educational part and sharing of information. There's talking about it, plainly. Not behind closed doors and not whispers. People are sexually assaulted. People are molested. People are taken advantage of. And not just sexually, monetarily, psychically, energetically. These things happen. And shamanism is not all light and airy and angels and, I think we have to dispel this notion, right? That somehow everybody's working in the light. Not true. If we look at South American Curandismo, there's always the light and the dark and the brujos and the angling for advantage. So I think, how do you educate people? You need to educate people. If you're looking for somebody who's only working in the light, but also knows how to fend off the darkness, these are some of the things that you can ask and look for. But also go in with your eyes wide open. Right? That there are risks. Don't act like there aren't once you've been informed. So there's this element of self-responsibility. I think speaking truth to power. And when I say that, I mean the power that is when you have taken a psychotropic substance, something that alters your consciousness. There is no consent. Period, paragraph, the end. The consent comes in advance. So if you don't feel like you can ask that practitioner questions and have the full information about what's going to happen and say, yes, I'm in, because that's where the consent happens, even about drinking ayahuasca. Not when you're even there at the ceremony, because by then the enchantment has already set in, right? And, the Women's Visionary Congress has some guidelines. So you can go to their website, read that, educate yourself. And if something happens, report it to the community. We are not the police, but hopefully we are the new paradigm of a collective of people holding space for each other's healing, such that the community will out and oust the people that are not behaving, acting, working, living in accordance with, our collective intention for healing and transformation. It's kind of like, 30 years ago, if I heard the word medicine, I would think of an antibiotic or an aspirin, right? Now when I hear the word medicine, I think of ayahuasca. I think about plant medicine. So I think we need to just continue in this vein, and it can take a while, to change how things happen. So when we say, here we are as a healing community, what does that mean? That means that the people who are abusers are not part of a healing community. And so for me, I think it's about standing firm, talking to people, seeking support. If of the talk that happened at the Alchemist Kitchen about the psychedelic patriarchy, about sexual abuse, like, it's happening, right? And to say that it isn't and that it hasn't just perpetuates something that's not true. So we continue to speak truth to power, to not be enchanted, and feet on the ground. Maintain your critical faculty. Feet on the ground. Roots deep. Feel firm, and then go. Don't go when you're already untethered, right? And if you're not sure, take a moment. It'll be there when you're ready. Meaning drinking ayahuasca or going into a situation that feels like you're not certain. But if you do, know that you're doing it. I'm going into a situation where I feel uncertain and I'm not sure about that person. So I think it's really about continuing to have these conversations, doing what you're doing, putting it out there, and continuing. I talk about cultivating entheogenic awareness. Well, this is part of it. This is part of the entheogenic awareness. Just because, we might see ourselves as doing something different or new or bringing this healing work to the world, to not get full of ourselves and think that we don't have the same pitfalls collectively, that we don't have the same, traps as, gurus in the past and other people, primarily men, in power, who have felt like they could take advantage of women. So I think that, we need to just continue to step up and hold ourselves accountable, hold our community accountable.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience and the beautiful art of making pusangas. I would love to end with a practical question, which is, how can people in Western industrialized societies be able to connect more deeply with plant spirits?
So, number one, I say look around. Walk down the street in New York and you'll notice that weed is what we call a weed is pushing up through the cement. Just notice. Go stand by a tree and say, wow, that oak tree has, 30,000 leaves and every one of them is one breath for me in my lifetime. I think that we, can make it as mysterious as we want, but we could just right now, I'm looking out the window at about 500 toy blossoms, Brugmansia. And I'm looking at some Australian wattle. I have this corn plant here behind me. Behind you, I see two beautiful plants. Wow. They're living, being, breathing things that are supporting our life here on the planet. We don't have to go to South America unless we want to. We don't have to drink ayahuasca unless we want to, because the plant spirits are all around us. So it's I think let's just take a minute and not only, is it this deeply spiritual thing, but our life on this planet as we know it wouldn't exist without the plants, because they're providing the very air that we breathe. So it's already happening. So I think it's just shifting and noticing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time here with us today, Sita. How can the audience best stay in touch with you?
You can go to PlantTeachers.com, 2 T's. And, you can, and there's a contact form. You can get in touch with me that way through PlantTeachers. And yeah, I think that's it. And you can, PlantTeachers has a Facebook page, and then I have a Facebook page.
All right.
I think that's it. Yeah.
We'll put those links down below this video.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Thank you, Lorna, for doing all of this. I know how much work it's been. And for those of you on the other side, like viewing this after the fact, I also want to acknowledge Lorna. And before we even got started, she really, she called in spirit, and she called in, our helpers to even infuse this very message. So I just want to call out to Lorna because she's interviewing a lot of people. So just to make sure that we understand that she's the hub on this wheel with many spokes at the moment. And so thank you, Lorna, for doing your work.
Thank you. It's truly, truly a pleasure.